Dawn unspools like thin wire over Hollis Bay, the tide slipping backward as if the ocean is taking a breath it refuses to release. Inside the Kincaid house, a kettle sits quiet on a cold burner, a circle of mineral ghosting the steel. The aquarium ticks. Flakes of food drift like confetti at a party no one came to. A phone glows on the counter, a charging cord coiled like a patient snake. Plates lean in the sink as if listening. The front door latch wears a crescent of fresh scratches, not violent, just hurry. Outside, fog presses its forehead to the glass. A hand-drawn tide chart lies open, a pencil ring around. Moon, low 3:12 a.m. The graphite smudged where a thumb second-guessed itself. What's missing here is louder than any scream. A work jacket, a backpack, a child's sketchbook, the rhythm of a family's mourning. The silence remembers. The silence misleads. Somewhere, the town is already practicing words like vanished. Yellow tape yawns across the Kincaid lawn. A soft warning in a soft town. A sheriff's mic chirps at the curb, his voice scattering into fog and phone cameras. The crowd leans forward, eager to be useful, terrified to be needed. Clipboards appear like talismans. Casseroles arrive as if nourishment can bribe fate. At the folding table, a gentle authority settles the air. Everett Cole asking for calm, for neighborly patience, for faith. Cal Boyd unrolls a laminated map with a contractor's certainty. Grids and arrows already imagined. Nora Pike angles a recorder and holds her breath. Lena Duarte watches numbers in her head, not faces. The town rehearses its lines. Have you heard? Can we help? While the real script is still being written underneath the roads. Somewhere, the tide pulls at a secret hinge. Detective Sloane Mercer arrives in a navy peacoat that drinks the fog and gives nothing back. She listens before she speaks, eyes traveling the gutter line. The porch scuffs, the street's shallow crown that would carry runoff to the estuary. Neighbors offer comfort packaged as clues. I saw a van. I heard a door. It was probably nothing. Each memory edited by sleeplessness and civic hope. Lena Duarte, who hates the sound of her own caution, steps close with a stack of invoices that don't line up. Sloane's pencil nests in the spiral of a notebook, lines connecting in silence. A cash transfer, a volunteer schedule, an after-hours permit that never got stamped. The detective doesn't say what she's thinking. She lets the wind speak first, the ocean second, then the paper. By afternoon, the volunteers have multiplied, orange vests blossoming like warning lilies along the cul-de-sacs. Everett Cole organizes by first names and eye contact, folding fear into chores. Cal Boyd sketches corridors of blackberry bramble on a whiteboard, his lines too confident for a first pass. Lena notes duplicate handwriting across separate shift sheets and swallows the thought like a secret seed. When a drone winds awake and a prayer circle tightens its ring, Sloane Mercer watches both with equal suspicion. The pastor's voice threads through the din, gentle, intimate, practiced, promising that nothing is beyond reach if the town moves as one. The promise lands like balm and like gravity. Evening presses early on the coast, headlights drawing white tunnels through the mist. A neighbor brings Sloane a footage clip, the camera's reflection catching the veiled street like a memory seeing itself. At 3:07 a.m., a van crosses the corner with quiet purpose. 3 minutes later, a distant hymn threads the audio under freeway hum. A melody that doesn't belong to insomnia. Sloane lays the tide chart beside the dashcam timeline. Moon, low, 3:12 a.m. And the numbers click like teeth. Across town, a bell rings once from St. Brin's, though no one has pulled the rope. The map changes in her head. From cul-de-sacs to culverts, from faces to habits. The kitchen turns into a diagram of absence. Sloane Mercer measures the ordinary. The angle of a chair skated back from the table, the half-moon of a coffee ring, The precise overfeeding in the aquarium that says someone tried to care for something they wouldn't see again. Tape flags bloom along baseboards. Luminol glows in clean, unhelpful blues. The room argues two stories at once. Packing list neatness against the startled sloppiness of departure. A drawer of takeout menus hides a folded receipt for gas, bought at 2:41 a.m. The tide chart sits where it sat this morning, now pressed under glass like a specimen. Sloane notes the graphite smear, the double ring around moon low 3:12 a.m., and writes the numbers on her palm. She lingers on the fish tank's metronome tick, the subtle, drowning lullaby of a filter. Houses don't lie, she thinks. People perform for them. The performance here was rushed, hopeful, and afraid of being watched. On the ball field command post, organization hardens into confidence. Cal Boyd unfurls a series of route maps so polished, they look laminated by memory, each corridor of brush and culvert labeled with a contractor's certainty. Sloane listens, asks about timestamps, pretends to accept the inevitability of perfect planning. Everett Cole moves through the circles of volunteers with a shepherd's touch, parting tensions with warm eyes and first names. Lena Duarte arrives with the morning's sign-in sheets and an apology for caring about handwriting. Her apology dies when Sloane lays two separate shifts side by side and the loops of the GS greet each other like cousins. A drizzle begins, baptizing the paper. Cal talks about drainage crowns, runoff arcs, where a van could tuck without flags. Sloane marks a quadrant nobody volunteered for. She writes one word, why, and draws a box around it until the paper thins. At the church pantry, the air smells of bleach, coffee, and stories edited for dignity. Everett speaks of compassion as logistics, routes for perishables, prayer lists, winter coats sorted by sleeve length. Sloane interviews between crates of canned peaches, letting silence pull more than questions can. Two volunteers recall Mara's careful gratitude, the way she rounded up when she couldn't afford to. A man mentions a benevolence envelope that appeared after a prayer circle. Another remembers after-hours deliveries that skipped the ledger. Everett smiles like a seal on a letter, wax intact, promising nothing improper, only discretion for neighbors embarrassed by need. Sloane touches the edge of a donation box and feels its weight shift. Cash tucked beneath receipts, a nervous secret. She thanks him, accepts a paper cup of coffee, and watches his hands when he says the word mercy, counting the beats. It takes him to open his palms. City Hall is a choir of drawers. Lena leads Sloane through the hymn, permits, invoices, transfers, each verse tight with numbers that don't rhyme. The church renovation bills split like cell division. Legitimate labor paired with after-hours cash lines rounded to even tens. A signature repeats with different pens. A date flips from Monday to Sunday to never. Sloane drags two rulers across the ledger columns and watches the misalignments reveal their drift. Outside, gulls argue over a fast food bag, evidence of a simpler crime. Lena's voice tightens as she explains the building funds, matching campaign. How donors love the idea of their dollars doubling in the dark. Sloane asks for copies and receives the originals instead, the clerk's hands betraying a decision made days ago. The detective feels the case tilt, not toward a culprit, but toward a structure. Structures don't panic. They simply continue. The voicemail arrives like a message in a Tide bottle. A neighbor's pocket dial at 3:19 a.m. 41 seconds of driveway gravel. Freeway hush and a melody too careful to be an accident. Sloane and Nora sit in the parked car, rain tasseling the windshield, replaying the clip until the hymn's contour separates from road noise. It is not sung so much as hummed, steady, measured, the way you'd count breaths to keep panic from cracking open. Nora boosts the levels, the hiss blossoms beneath it. A faint metallic clink repeats on the offbeat. Sloane traces the cadence on the back of her hand. 4 slow bars. Pause. 2 quick taps. Then circles maintenance access in her notebook as if naming it can make it surface. The tide charts time aligns like teeth in a lock. Sloane doesn't say hope. She says direction. The car's heater ticks. The hymn keeps time. The utility office smells of blueprint paper and the dust of decisions made decades ago. Sloane spreads vellum across a drafting table, and the town rearranges itself into pale arteries. Culverts that bend like careful lies. Access hatches annotated in pencil hands, long retired. A clerk rolls a ladder to the mezzanine and returns with a brittle tube stamped, decommissioned, South Grid. When the overlay settles, streets vanish and channels appear, a ghost city that wakes only when it rains. Sloane traces a corkscrew symbol that matches Junie's sketch, then another mark labeled Maintenance Vault, 14 feet. Set not far from the Kincaid Street, but hidden by blackberry and ordnance. She doesn't smile, she exhales. Structures, she thinks again, prefer to continue. But this grid suggests a promise too. That continuance leaves residue. Mud, algae, hymns that carry under pavement. She copies coordinates, folds the map, and feels the case click a single tooth forward. Sloane reconstructs the night by coaxing reflections to testify. She walks the route with a pocket camera and a patient stride, collecting slivers of the van from storefront glass, chrome letters, and a bakery window that remembered more than the clerk. The fog had made the town into a softbox. Headlights smeared, but angles held. Frame by frame, she pins a path that cheats the main drag and favors back lanes that slope toward storm drains, where gravity insists on its quiet kingdom. At a corner, barbers. A convex mirror captured a taillight nicked by a crack, a wounded star she can follow. She charts the sequence against tide tables and traffic cams, not to catch a driver, but to map an intention. The van moved like a person who knows where the light is weakest. The route doesn't end. It disappears, which is different. Disappearance requires a host. She circles the South Grid again. At St. Brin's, the pastor chooses words with the care of someone placing small stones across a creek. He speaks of rest for the anxious, of grace for the restless, of how a town can carry its tired neighbors without asking them to confess exhaustion. The sanctuary fills with the rustle of jackets and the feel of being held. Sloane sits in the back pew, pen-capped, listening to the cadence, not the content. He never says the family's name. He never says river, ladder, hatch. He speaks of doors and thresholds and weather that passes if we stay together under one roof. People nod as if a verdict has been read, but the only sentence Sloane hears is the length of the pauses, measured, even rehearsed. She watches his hands open and close like gentle hinges, remembers the hummed hymn's time signature, and marks it down. 4 slow bars, pause, 2 small taps. The roof keeps the rain off, nothing more. Nora releases an episode that stops being a podcast and becomes an accelerant. Die. In a motel room that smells of coffee and sea damp. She edits until the hymn's thread rises like a fine wire through the noise, then pairs it with a map of hatches and an accountant's unease. The upload pings. The town inhales through its teeth. Volunteers split into crews of believers and crews of doubters. Casseroles cool untouched. The command post starts guarding not just boxes, but reputations. Sloane knew this would happen, knew that speaking aloud a shape gives it corners sharp enough to cut. She lets it cut. The phone starts churning with tips that are mostly guilt and some truth. She asks Nora if she's ready for the echo that follows, saying the quiet part. Nora nods and doesn't pretend bravery. Outside, fog moves like a crowd. Inside, the waveform blooms and won't stop. In the lab's slow quiet, Dr. Raina Wells teaches the case to breathe through a microscope. She teases a smear of mud from a floor Matt Sloane pulled from a salvage yard, rinses it, spins it, and leaves behind a constellation of glassy forms that only know water. Under light, rare diams appear, delicate ovals with ribbed windows. Species that prefer the South Branch where fresh water flirts with salt and turns the world brackish. Raina narrates the river's biography without poetry, and it still sounds like fate. Sloane feels a small, hard brightness in her chest. Not hope, direction again. They fix the slide, print the images, and circle names as tongue-twisting as spells. Outside, the day tilts toward storm. Inside, the organisms point without caring to be helpful. Sloane thanks Raina and pockets the photo like a compass someone bothered to draw. The sanctuary is locked, but pianos are built to hold secrets and songs. Sloane waits until the custodian's keys finish their nervous jangling and the door sighs. The instrument is a walnut upright that remembers funerals and winter pageants. Its bench creaks like an old friend confessing. Inside, under a cushion of hymnals, she finds a ledger wrapped in a choir robe sleeve, pages buttered thin by hands that believed in neatness. Columns march. Dates, initials, benevolence transfers, round numbers that round off guilt. The ink tells its own weather, bold on holidays, faint in storm weeks. Names never appear, only letters that anyone in town could match if pressed. RK, MK, CB, EC. The robe smells of candle wax and citrus cleaner. Sloane steadies the book and photographs each page while the sanctuary holds its breath. When she closes the bench, the small thud feels like a gavel. Mercy, she thinks, has a filing system. Back at City Hall, paper becomes choreography. Lena lines the volunteer rotation logs along the counter. Sloane slots the ledger beside them. They move like two players at the edge of a board, tilting, aligning, discovering how the pieces always knew each other. Cal's name isn't there, only a neat CB. Scratching time into even hours that mirror invoice stamps for. After hours drain inspection. The matches are shy at first, then brazen. A Tuesday night shift aligns with a cash withdrawal. A Thursday benevolence entry meets a cruise snack purchase at 1:58 a.m. Lena's voice drops to a whisper, as if the paper could flinch. Sloane taps a cadence with her pencil. 4 slow bars, pause, 2 taps, then circles the dates that nest like a flock. The room's fluorescent hum becomes a held note. If this is charity, it's choreographed. If it's rescue, it's rehearsed. Structures don't panic, they schedule. They stake out the south grid when fog comes early and generous. Nora sits low in the passenger seat, recorder dead, senses awake. Sloane watches the hatch through a sliver of windshield and the side mirror where ghosts prefer to appear. At 1:11 a.m., a string of flashlights unspools along the alder line, bobbing with the rhythm of people who know where their feet land. No chatter, no uncertainty, only practiced quiet. The lights dip at the hatch and vanish, as if the earth swallowed them politely. A minute later, the hymn surfaces, not sung but shaped. 4 bars, the pause, like a held breath. 2 soft taps metal to metal. Sloane thumbs the door unlock, but keeps it silent. Rushing in would net nothing but fog. She times the ascent, 3 minutes, then faces reappear, heads averted from where a camera might be. Mercy, she thinks again, doesn't wear a mask. It wears routine. Morning breaks thin and metallic. Lena arrives with a banker's box and the kind of certainty that corrodes doubt. She spreads deposit slips, vendor invoices, and building fund tallies until the table looks like weather maps for a storm that already happened. Cal's contractor company bills for after hours, culvert clearing, line up with cash withdrawals from the church. Benevolence account. Round numbers end in zeros that feel like closed mouths. A note in Everett's careful script reads, "Match approved, quiet blessing." Lena doesn't look triumphant. She looks tired, as if numbers carry weight in the wrists. Sloane scans the column where donations doubled, then tracks the extra to a hardware purchase. Vented masks, battery lanterns, pry bars. She traces a fingertip from one receipt to the next and feels not the thrill of a clue, but the gravity of a machine. The ledger isn't a diary, is a schedule of consent. By sunset, Sloane stands at the estuary's edge, the tide turning like a secret reconsidered. She holds what she needs, a ledger that forgot to be ashamed, rotations that choreograph darkness, invoices that translate faith into tasks. The town did not lose a family. It absorbed them into an apparatus designed to move frightened people off the board, and to keep them off if fear splashed. She feels anger, clean and cold, but keeps the lid on. This isn't about a single pair of hands. It's about many palms held out, then closed. She calls the team, warrants for the hatch and the church office, quiet interviews before anyone can harmonize their answers. When Nora asks, "So, what do we call it?" Sloane gives the word she hates. A network. The wind lifts, bringing brackish sweetness and the hiss of eelgrass. In the distance, the bell tower holds its pose. Structures don't panic. They continue until someone interrupts. The hatch gives up slowly, bolts protesting like old men pulled from warm chairs, and the air that rises is the kind that clings. Wet metal, algae, a rumor of gasoline. A perimeter blossoms from quiet to official as reflective tape and tripods bloom in the brush. The detective keeps her voice low, not to comfort anyone but to keep the place from learning their rhythm. She looks at the tide table, at the hour, at the seam where asphalt surrenders to mud, and hears it before anyone else admits they do. A measured thrum under traffic, 4 long pulses, a breath, 2 small taps. The recorder drinks it. The team stills. Somewhere below, someone is counting time to stay awake or sane. The detective writes the cadence on her wrist, like a patient vow. When the lid finally frees, the ladder inside spirals down with the promise of a hard answer that will not be kind. They clip harnesses. No one speaks the word rescue. They say, descend. The tunnel receives them with the patient courtesy of a place that cannot hurry. Boots find wet steel. Breath halos in the flashlight cones. The clink of carabiners pretends to be courage. The detective descends with a practiced vertical calm, counting the turns like rosary beads. 1, 2, 3. Until the ladder gives way to a culvert chamber no textbook would claim. Concrete sweats, water threads along a lip, and the world narrows to a whirring hush that sounds like fear translated into infrastructure. The hymn returns, softer now, as if whoever made it has learned not to waste air. 4 long notes. The pause, a tremor. 2 taps that ring off the bolt heads like a secret handshake. The team fans their beams and traces scuffs, fibers clinging to a seam of duct tape. A dropped card with a verse about rest. The detective steadies a palm against the wall and feels it vibrate, the passage humming under skin like a second pulse. They breach the smaller hatch with a reluctant shriek, and the light falls onto blankets laid with a care that indicts. In the corner, a child turns from the beam, not startled so much as exhausted by it, lips tinged at the edges, eyes watering from air that forgot to move. The detective crouches low to make the world nearer, voice shaped into steady weather, counting the hymn's pattern with her fingers so the room can borrow a metronome. The child mirrors it, 2 taps faltering into a whisper about a humming room where stories were told to make waiting noble. A medic checks pulse, pulls a mask over a mouth that trembles only after it is safe enough to. Small details climb into view. A spiral ladder sketched on cardboard, a prayer card folded into a tiny boat, a lunchbox with a name smudged but not gone. On the concrete, footprints the size of a second pair lead away and do not return. Relief arrives, braided to dread. The adjacent chamber speaks, without a voice. Bedrolls arranged in opposing corners as if to preserve the fiction of privacy. A plastic tub of snack bars beside a canister whose warning label has been peeled to a blank virtue. A A stack of cards with verses about rest and death. Obedience clipped by a rubber band the color of old straw. On the wall, tape outlines mark where items once hung. Bags, maybe. Or a schedule someone no longer needs to read. The detective photographs everything, not out of habit but out of respect, documenting the strange, terrible neatness with which care can be weaponized. She inventories lanterns, a pry bar, gloves too small for the hands that place them, and a ledger page photocopy with initials standing in for names. The room smells of cotton and bleach, and a tired sweetness that turns the stomach. It is not a dungeon. It is worse, a sanctuary engineered to make surrender feel reasonable. By night, the town gathers where it always does, when meaning needs a room. The detective walks the aisle with the weight of air and photographs and a living child behind her, and the shepherd meets her halfway with a smile that wants to end the day. He asks for one more quiet sunset, one more morning before sirens, because kindness deserves a softer hour. The contractor hovers near the side door, posture a coin spinning on its rim. The clerk stands with a box in her arms and numbers on her tongue. The reporter keeps the recorder at her side, like a hand that could be held or lifted. The detective says, "No," not loudly, not theatrically. Just the word as hinge, and the room's breath changes direction. She names the hatch, the schedule, the cash, the hymn. The bell does not ring. The child's small cough carries to the last pew, and it is the only liturgy anyone answers. Confessions don't arrive as thunder. They seep, polite, defensive, needy. The camera red light warms and the town's helpers recalibrate their memories. A volunteer insists the network was a bridge, not a trap. Another says the word mercy until it sounds like rope. Sloane lets the gaps build their own grammar. Promises signed in kitchens, keys passed in vestibules, envelopes slid into glove boxes with scripture cards as receipts. Cal's voice is flinty when he says people beg to leave, and Everett's replies are pastoral, explaining that to shepherd is to choose the field and the weather. Nora holds the silence like a bowl, inviting it to overflow. Lena lays out the math. Rounded tens, matched gifts, night labor that balanced a moral ledger by zeroing out dissent. The hymn becomes a metronome for obedience, not comfort. When the lights go off, the room feels smaller, as if the building itself had been listening and is finally done pretending. Cal's account is a blueprint spoken aloud. He draws the route with blunt fingers. Borrowed van swapped behind the shuttered mill. Plates traded like favors, towelite cracked by a pallet because speed beat caution. He insists the family wanted a clean exit, that the culvert was staging, not cage. Sloane doesn't argue. She counts. When the van rolled out, who flagged traffic, who laid chain in the river mouth where current would hide the sink. He talks about ballast and air bubbles, about night sight and radio check-ins, about a bell they never rang because the town didn't need alarm. It needed order. The worst part slides out last. If someone panicked, there were reclamations. The word lands like a tool, not a sin, bringing the strays back under, because a secret is weaker than the weakest stomach. Nora's pen stops. The room holds the sound of the river doing what it does, taking things and making them quiet. Everett chooses the chapel, not the station, and Sloane allows it because the room will testify. He speaks of calling and burden, of neighbors with wolves at their doors, debts, bruises, despair, and how a town can carry what laws would only log. He names the network a refuge, the hatches a vestibule, the hymn a signal to pause so fear wouldn't stampede good intentions. Sloane asks why. Reclamation required locked bolts. Everett answers with sorrow polished thin. Some wanted to return to the storm, and storms swallow boats that drift. He admits to approving matches, to scheduling nights, to telling helpers to speak softly and never to cameras. The word mercy, phrase. Nora records the cadence, Lena marks dates in the air with her finger like a metronome. Whenever it finally says the word deaths, it is plural and barely audible, shaped like a prayer not meant to be heard. The chapel absorbs it, then doesn't give it back. Shovels find what sermons cannot. Under the memorial garden's tidy walls, soil parts to reveal layers of knowing. Plastic sheeting tucked like a guilty sheet corner. A ring of stones arranged too evenly, a whisper of fabric that still holds its shape. Dr. Raina Wells narrates in the cool language of certainty. Disturbed strata, trace gases, commingled diatoms in places they shouldn't be. Sloane stands at the edge, anger sealed under procedure, while Lena catalogs tags with hands that don't shake. Not even when a small bracelet slips free, its elastic tired from waiting. Nora turns her lens away at the worst moments and back again because someone will deny this happened if the light looks away too long. The garden's plaque reads in brushed script about rest. The earth replies with inventory numbers, and the way silence learns to stack. Mercy, here, is a word that will need a trial to survive. Uni's voice is soft, but it does not wander. She describes the hymn as a waiting room, a promise that someone would come if everyone stayed still and good. The humming meant hold, not hope. She explains the spiral ladder sketch was not fantasy but a map, and that she drew another because drawing made the air feel bigger. The room they called the humming room had stories about new starts told like bedtime, and rules about who could change their mind told like sin. She talks about Beck's shoes lined neatly, about a blanket that smelled like their mother's scrubs, about a door that opened to kindness with a clock inside it. Sloane listens with a discipline that hides a break. Nora sets the recorder on the bed and simply looks at her. On the windowsill, a family photo holds faces that are both proof and ache. When Junie stops, the silence feels at last like hers. Justice looks procedural until it starts speaking in first names. The courtroom reduces months of fog and culverts into charges that sound tidy but feel unpronounceable. Conspiracy to conceal, unlawful confinement, negligent homicide yoked to words like benevolence and shepherding. Everett's counsel bargains down the vocabulary until mercy is a clause, and reclamation is a synonym for oversight. Cal stares at the table as if the wood grain could redraw the root of a van. Sloane sits behind the railing with a posture that refuses theatrics. Lena keeps her hands flat, as if papers might rise and flee. Nora writes less and listens more, catching the sighs between stipulations. Dr. Wells explains diams to a jury that leans forward with the hunger of people promised meaning. Junie's statement is read in a voice that belongs to no one in the room, and everyone. Please land like dull hammers. Truth works quieter and longer. The town hall fills the way kitchens do when the power goes out. Neighbors clustering around one reliable flame. The casseroles that once traveled like edible prayers arrive lukewarm and unclaimed. Voices climb the walls in braided anger and grief. Some demand prison, some want absolution because they donated in good faith, and faith is expensive to return. A woman speaks about her brother, who slept easier, knowing the pastor knew his name. Another holds up a flyer from the building fund with corners softened by years in a drawer. Sloane answers in the language of sequence. Dates, signatures, schedules, hatch numbers. Refusing to trade evidence for catharsis, Lena reads the math without raising her voice. Nora asks the room to sit with the discomfort of calling harm by a familiar name. When the microphone reaches the back row, silence takes it and refuses to give it back. The town learns that aftermath isn't audience, it's homework. At Blue Hour, the estuary returns to its slow arithmetic, lifting and lowering what the day tries to solve. Sloane stands at the concrete lip where the hatch mouth drinks the tide, the ledger's copies thin in her pocket like paper ribs. The water flexes a skin of pewter. Eelgrass bows and straightens as if practicing forgiveness. She thinks of the word network, of how it tried to make itself a synonym for neighbor, and of how both require consent to mean anything but gravity. The hymn has left the air. The only metronome is her own breath counting 4 slow bars. A pause. 2 taps that now measure distance, not obedience. She says the names without rank. Rowan, Mara, Beck, Junie, and lets them sit on the surface until the water carries them outward in syllables. When she turns back to the road, the fog is thinner. The place has not healed. It has stopped lying. Nora records the last episode in a room small enough to hear her own pulse. She reads the town back to itself without flinching. How charity put on overalls and carried bolt cutters. How prayer became logistics. How a lullaby kept time while decisions hardened in the dark. She refuses spectacle, leaving the worst details in their measured language and letting listeners feel the cold. Instead of seeing the blood, she says the names that deserve daylight and the initials that earned none. She thanks the child who counted, the clerk who kept math honest, the doctor who taught water to testify, the detective who believed structure over rumor. She leaves a space of silence where an ad break would go, because some stories shouldn't have sponsors. When she fades the final track, it is not applause that follows, but the hum of the room, the sound of a town relearning how to listen to itself. They take the bell down in daylight because endings deserve to be seen. The crane lifts slowly, cautious as a hand moving a sleeping child. The cracked lip shows itself like a healed fracture. In the mouth of the bronze, someone has tucked a folded tide chart. The graphite circle around. Moon, low, 3:12 a.m. Pressed hard enough to ghost through 2 pages. Sloane steps close and slips the paper free, not to claim it, but to keep it from being ritualized into forgetfulness. The bell leaves a pale circle on the tower stone, a negative of years rung for births and storms, and the false comfort of gatherings that protected secrets. Nora photographs the absence. Lena signs for the chain of custody and exhales like arithmetic completed. Somewhere in the town, a door that always stuck opens easily. Tide turns. The work ahead is uncinematic and durable. The story ends where maintenance begins.